Hello, everyone.
Hey guys, welcome into the podcast. On today's podcast, we are going to be talking about the things that you need to have in order to have success in a domestic discipline relationship.
But of course, before we get to that, if you're enjoying this content, would you go ahead and hit that like button to let us know? And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, because every time someone hits the subscribe button, it makes me smile.
And if you want to help support us continuing to do what we do here, the best place to do that is over on Patreon. On Patreon, you do get Patreon exclusive bonus content, as well as access to our Discord server. So if any of those things interest you, definitely check out the link down below.
So this is a topic, I don't know if we have talked about this ever on the podcast, or if we had, it's been a while.
I don't think that we've ever compiled a list like this.
Yeah.
We've talked about elements that we will talk about in this podcast. We have talked about elements of those things before, but never quite like this.
Yeah, and this is, as we were talking a little bit about this before doing the podcast, I thought, this is something that really is important, because it's something that I don't know if we asked ourselves before we got involved in domestic discipline, but not that I don't think that we would have not gone into it, but I think it would have been nice to have a list like this before we kind of delved into everything.
I definitely think that we would have still pursued domestic discipline. We would have just gone in with a little bit better perspective about what we were really getting into, because no, we did not ask ourselves these questions. We did not have these things in mind, and we definitely fumbled through some pretty difficult times in our relationship because of that. And so we wanted to compile this list because it is based off of our experience, the experience that we have seen others go through, and I think that it will help you be able to ask yourselves these questions, to be able to see, is domestic discipline something that I'm willing to sign up for? Is this something that I'm willing to pursue? And just go in with the perspective of what it really means. That's
a first good thing to really ask yourself, right?
True. Last week we talked all about the different things that you need to ask yourself before starting domestic discipline. So this is kind of an expansion off of that, but rather than questions you need to ask yourself, it's more of like things that you need to understand, that you need to embrace in order to have success in your domestic discipline relationship. And every relationship is going to be different. The way every relationship is structured is going to be different. But these are kind of universal principles that you can take and apply them to your relationship in a way that makes sense. So the first thing that you need to have in order to have success in domestic discipline is you need to have the commitment to the process. I know that we have gone through periods of time while trying to structure our domestic discipline, while trying to find what works for us. We've gone through periods of time where it's really hard. It's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. I've seen that in other people's relationships as well, that while they're trying to formulate these habits that align with their values, it's not necessarily something that comes natural. It's something they want, but not something that they inherently know how to do. And so there are periods where it feels really, really difficult, and you have to be willing to make the commitment to push through those times in order to get to a place of success.
It's this is a concept that when going in, we had a lot of conversations about. And so I don't want to say that I was not committed to this when we went into this, because as I've said before on the podcast, Arya came to me with this and we had a lot of discussions before we went in, but I didn't realize the amount of that commitment that was needed in order to succeed in this relationship. And so if you're already looking into this and you're already having discussions, I want to kind of say first, congratulations, you're already part of that commitment of trying to further your relationship and make things better. But remember, before you embark on this, that yes, exactly as Arya said, there are going to be a lot of ups and downs. And the commitment is easy to have when you're on an upward swing, right? Or you're going up that hill. But where it's hard is when you're in those low points, when you're in those hard points, to keep the commitment to what you're doing. And so, yeah, absolutely, this type of relationship takes a lot of commitment, because even though we love our relationships are hard work. They just are. And so you have to be willing to embrace what it's going to take to cultivate the commitment in your relationship.
Well, and I think that you made a really good statement there, that relationships are hard work, regardless of the style of relationship you have. So we are talking explicitly about the domestic discipline side, but really to have a long-term lasting relationship, you're going to go through hard periods, hard moments, hard situations, regardless of if you are in domestic discipline or not.
Yeah.
And so this is just an added element of that. And you have to decide what your goals are and what you really want at the end of the day, and then just commit to doing what you need to do to achieve those goals.
Absolutely.
Now, the next thing that I think is one of the most important things, and it's really more important on the head of household side, I feel like, than the taken in hand side. But you have to have a level of care and compassion in your relationship.
I would have to agree with you when it comes to talking about the head of household. If you have not cultivated head of households in your life, compassion and a caring and understanding, because if you come from this from another angle, which can be, oh yeah, this is going to be a great lifestyle, so I can be an authoritarian, that I can really take control in the way that everything I say and do is going to be done exactly the way I want it, and I could care less what her feelings are in the process, and also I could care less whether she grows or not. That's not a part of this. Part of what we're saying here is that you're entering in to this relationship for the benefit of your taken in hand. You want to see her become a better person, a better wife, a better mother. And that involves that everything that you do, yeah, maybe from the outside looking in, it looks differently to other people, but you know in your relationship that part of, after you've made that commitment, is that the reason you're following through with all of the things that you've decided to fall through is because you care about that person. You want them to be better, and everything that you do is out of that compassion, out of that love, and out of that care for them.
Now, from the taken in hand side, I do have a level of care and compassion towards my head of household. It's not necessarily the same.
Correct.
It comes in the form of respect towards you, and it also comes in the form of being understanding of the responsibility of your role, and not necessarily being egocentric in my own experience in this. Because I think the temptation is to say, I'm the one under rules, I'm the one being disciplined, so this is hard for me and me alone. That's not the case. There is a level of difficulty that comes from the head of household position. They have to completely change their thinking and how they interact in their relationships. They have to hold accountability and follow through, and those are not easy tasks. And so having that understanding of your responsibility in this relationship and understanding your process in that, and also giving you the respect that you deserve, that is what care and compassion from the taken in hand side looks like. And
Absolutely.
That is also extremely important.
Absolutely, and I love how you made that comparison, because this is a two-way street. This isn't just one person in the relationship is going to be caring and compassionate, and the other one is going to not reciprocate that. That's why this relationship, I think, has worked for us and many, many people. Is it may look, again, from the outside to some people that this is very authoritarian, but it's not. Everything that is done, as Aria was saying, even from the head of household's point of view, is you're trying to juggle a lot. You're trying to make sure that you're being you're not only holding your spouse accountable and everything, but you're assessing, you're making sure that they're reaching goals that you've set both for your relationship and for them, and that you yourself, as a head of household, are growing yourself as a leader of your home and as a leader of your relationship, and in that, making sure that as you're growing, that you're realizing, wow, I'm finding more love and compassion for my partner, and we are actually growing closer together because of this. And those are the results that you're trying to get, which is why being caring and compassionate is so important to this relationship, and really is something that's right after your commitment. That is exactly what you're committing to.
The next thing you really have to have in your domestic discipline relationship in order to see real long-term success is consistency.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Now, it's tempting to think that this is something that is only on the head of household side, and I will agree that a head of household has to be consistent in order to see success. But as a taken in hand, I have to show up consistently. I have to follow through on following the rules consistently and fulfilling my role, fulfilling my responsibilities, doing things like self-reporting or, communicating, all those things. I have to do those things consistently in order to see success in this relationship as well. It cannot be one person being consistent and the other person not doing anything at all. You have to have both people showing up consistently in their role. But a head of household, this is really make or break in your position.
This is something that I'm getting better at. Don't think I've mastered it by any means, but you're absolutely right. It's not that the taken in hand doesn't have any consistency that's put on her, but I will say this is the part of the relationship where I think if head of households, if you're bad in this area, it's just not going to work. And how do I know that? Well, obviously, when we started the relationship, I didn't realize how consistent I really truly needed to be. I thought, okay, I can make a few tweaks here and there, or, she knows what the rules are, and so she just needs to kind of do them, right? And I didn't realize I needed to be a lot more hands-on. And I want to be careful when I say that too, because it's not that as if you're micromanaging necessarily, but hands-on in terms of you can't just set the rules. You can't just set the expectations and say, okay, then we'll evaluate in a week. This needs to be a daily thing. This is an expectation that you make every single day. You make commitments and to be consistent, to perhaps talk to your spouse throughout the day. There are big consistencies of, again, holding them accountable to the rules and making sure that you are being consistent in schedule, that you're being consistent in communication, that you're being consistent in your follow-up with after punishment or correction, that you're following up to make sure that your relationship is restored and that she understands why the correction or the punishment happened. There are a ton of different things. I could go down a huge list of all the different things that you need to be consistent with. But the biggest thing that you need to remember is that the consistency, the ability for the relationship to thrive really is on your back to be able to make sure that it works the way it's supposed to.
One thing that you kind of mentioned was the consistency of following up after punishment or correction. I would say not even just to make sure that your relationship is restored and that things are moving forward, but also to make sure that the necessary changes have been made.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Absolutely.
Because you don't want to go through corrections and punishments that are earned, that, something happened to create the necessity of that spanking, and then not make sure that the changes have been made. Anytime discipline happens, there is an expectation that I'm not going to repeat that behavior.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one, because that's something that I don't think I was very consistent about, especially in the beginning, and gotten a little better with. But you're absolutely right, because there can be this tendency of, from the taken in hand, not all the time, but there can be this idea of, well, I'm still going to do that again, or I don't really realize why this was a problem. And so, yeah, that follow up to make sure that you're going to be getting back on the right path is very, very key to this.
Mm-hmm. And I think that we should do an entire podcast about this.
Oh, yeah.
But really, domestic discipline is head of household led.
Yes.
So if you want to see consistency from your taken in hand, see consistency in her ability to follow the rules and have that communication and do what she's supposed to do, you need to lead by being consistent yourself as a head of household. Because I will say that there was a period of time, and this is part of going back to that commitment, because there was a period of time that our relationship felt really, really hard because Coda wasn't being consistent in his leadership, and he wasn't leading me by his example and through his expectations to what I needed to be doing. And so you can't have it just one way. It really has to be both people. And the head of household really does set the tone for the relationship in that way. Like I said, we could do a whole podcast on that.
Absolutely. And some of you may ask, well, how do we know if that's happening? And just quickly, I want to bring up, because you're right, we could do a whole podcast on that. But just quickly, I want to bring up, if you're finding that the taken in hand is having to almost bring up things that happened a lot, which is what happened early on in our relationship. Like, she was wanting me to lead, but all of the little things that were being brought up, even her self-reporting, was a little bit too much. If you're finding that you're having a lot of conversations with your taken in hand of her saying, well, I really think we need to do this, or I really think that you didn't hold me accountable here, and all that kind of stuff, that's a problem. That's, again, part of the consistency head of households, that you have got to make sure that you are controlling the dialogue to an extent. That if your taken in hand is coming to you a lot, expressing a lot of different things, that could be a problem. You want to make sure that you're the one usually initiating those conversations.
Yes, because again, we should probably do a whole podcast on this alone, but there is an expectation that I self-report, but if I am self-reporting every infraction and you're not necessarily paying attention enough to catch anything, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I would say that I think one of the last things we'll cover in this podcast, there's probably more, but I've wanted to really hit the most important ones.
Yeah.
And we kind of mentioned it in that last point, but communication.
Oh man, this is one that head of households can have a hard time with as well.
I think that communication, especially this level of deep, intimate communication, is uncomfortable for most people.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not something that we're really used to doing in our relationships.
Not at all. And in fact, I think it is hard for most, not all, but for most head of households. And the reason is that communication, especially even though it's the person that you care for the most and love the most, you're taking in hand. Sometimes you're feeling a little bit vulnerable in what you're trying to talk to her about, or even this is something because you're still learning maybe to be a good head of household. You're still trying to be more consistent. All of those things. Communication can feel hard sometimes. I mean, there are some times where I feel like I'm being absolutely clear of an expectation, or what I want to see happen when I put forth a vision, or whatever it might be. And then we have something happen and I realize, oh gosh, I wasn't very, very clear at all. I thought I was being, and of course then my taken in hand has come unraveled a little bit, and we have to take care of that because it started with poor communication, and I'm just having to get better with that. And one of the things is you just learn as you go along, but one of the things I can tell you, head of households, is don't shy away from that. That's going to be something that you really, again, we love to just set it and forget it, right? We don't realize that there has to be this ongoing, just like with consistency, there has to be ongoing communication. And that's hard, and it's hard to get used to sometimes.
I definitely think that it can be really hard for a lot of head of households because you do have to figure out not only what is your communication style, what is the communication style that resonates with your taken in hand.
That's good.
Because I know for me, I need more direct communication. And I need to know exactly what you want. And sometimes it's hard for you to articulate that in a way that makes sense for me. And we have to kind of talk through it and figure out what exactly is it that you want so that I can meet those expectations.
You know, you just brought up a really, really good point. It's when those wires get crossed a little bit that this gets hard, right? Because gosh, the times where, again, I think I'm being clear and our wires are crossed and I'm like, man, this conversation that should have taken like 10 minutes took half an hour to 45 minutes. But you know what? Let me encourage you. That is a good thing. Don't try to rush through things when you're having the wires being crossed. That is something you need to work through. And even though it is hard, you want to do that. You want to see the consistency there. And yeah, sometimes it can be exhausting as well. This idea of trying to get on the right page in communication, oh gosh, it can be exhausting. But I promise you it's worth it and you'll grow from that.
Another podcast that we could do is how to keep communication productive, because I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for conversations to take time as long as they're being productive, because I know for me the temptation when those wires do get crossed is to get frustrated and then communication's no longer productive. And what do you do when that happens?
Right.
So we'll go all into that in another podcast in the future as well, because it's important.
Yes, absolutely.
But you talked about how communication can be hard for a head of household because it feels vulnerable. That is the same reason communication is hard for a taken in hand. Is it feels extremely vulnerable, and sometimes it's really hard to convince yourself it's okay to be vulnerable. And so that vulnerability aspect, especially as a taken in hand, I am making myself so physically vulnerable through the process of accepting spanking, right? And now I have to make myself emotionally vulnerable through the process of, you know, communicating my needs, communicating my fears, communicating all the things that you really have to have perspective on as my head of household in order to lead me well, in order to make good decisions. And that can be really hard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because it is vulnerable on both sides.
But it's necessary.
Yes.
And it's the only way that you're going to see long-term success is if you have such a strong level of communication that you can almost anticipate. You get to a point where you can almost anticipate, but that doesn't negate the power of the spoken word, right? Even if Coda can anticipate what my needs are, for me to be able to come to him and express those needs is still really, really powerful. And even if I can anticipate what his decisions are, what his desires are in our relationship, the power of hearing him make those declarations, set those expectations, set those rules explicitly and verbally, there's power in that. So you never want to get to a place where you're not communicating.
And to kind of piggyback on what you just said, you know, hear what she just said, head of households, you know, the power that she gets from hearing those things in the details. So don't shy away from the details, be specific and really work hard to make sure that you leave no stone unturned. That is the most important part of communication. And is it hard? Yeah, absolutely it is. But it is worth it, and I think it's absolutely, like you said, one of the most key things that we've been talking about in this podcast today.
All right, guys, we are going to continue this conversation over on our post show. If you want access to our post show, links on how to do that is down below, either through Patreon membership or YouTube membership, and we hope to see you over there. If not, we will talk to you next time.
See you later.